The North American standard cab had been a staple on diesel locomotives since the 1960s, but fast forward 30 years later, this design was starting to become outdated with the introduction of wide cabs. In spite of this though, they were still common everywhere, and still being produced on models like the EMD SD70 and GE-8, which people thought were the last examples of the standard cabs, but the 1990s would see the final hurrah for the tried and true standard cabs. By the 90s, the North American standard cab was pretty much being phased out in favor of stricter FRA mandates regarding locomotive construction, as new locomotive models would require to have safety cabs on their designs. A majority of the Class 1s had already been sold on wide cabs when they were introduced, but one railroad begged to differ. Everyone's favorite town-wrecking, PSR-milking layoff master, Norfolk Southern. You see, NS was still a heavy user for standard cab locomotives because of their operations, seeing as they inherited the operating practice from the Southern of running locomotives long hood forward, believing that turning locomotives around to face the right way was viewed as a waste of time. In spite of the role that the end of the short hood had to lead, NS combated this by running high hood locomotives since they could operate both hoods. Even when they inherited standard cab models, they still operated them long hood forward. Now, this decision was met with some controversy, mostly due to crew safety and the working conditions, specifically the lack of toilets on some units. Word on the street goes was that Norfolk Southern solved this issue of toilets by giving crews buckets for them to shit in. God, even back then, NS was still a crummy company. Starting in 1992, NS called upon the locomotive builders for new locomotives, with the request for both of them to sport the standard cabs. From EMD, with 80 examples, was the Spartan cab SD70, and from General Electric, with 125 examples, is the -9 40C. Debuting in 1992, the SD70 was vastly different from the predecessing SD60, such as being slightly longer and taller, running on a 16-cylinder prime mover, which increased their horsepower to 4,000 horsepower, and riding on then new radial steering trucks, which was amongst the few reasons why some railroads went for the SD70, mostly due to General Electric not offering steerable trucks. At the time, one distinguishable feature from other standard cabs was the bulge on the engineer's side, which was done to house electrical equipment within the limited space of the smaller nose. 122 were built between 1992 and 1999, with a few railroads buying them, which were the Illinois Central, Conrail, Norfolk Southern, and the Southern Peru Copper Corporation in Peru. Production took place at the General Motors plant in London, Ontario, Canada, with some examples being assembled at Supersteel in Schenectady, New York, and the Conrail examples being built at the Giudiata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania. NS would acquire 56 SD70s, and later absorbing Conrail's fleet of 70s following the split, totaling the fleet up to 80 Spartan cabs. The -9s made their debut in 1993 to great success, but the standard cab variant showed up 2 years later for Norfolk Southern in 1995. They still maintained the aesthetic of a regular -9, but with the changes being the standard cabs, the split cooling radiators, less weight and fuel capacity, and while the -9s had 4,400 horsepower, the NS variants had 4,000 horsepower as a way to save on fuel and reduce tractive effort, although it was possible to adjust the units to 4,400 horsepower, allegedly by a key switch inside the locomotive's control compartments. A distinguishing feature of these units was the addition of a roof-mounted AC, which gained them the nicknames Top Hats. Just don't expect them to be snobbish. In total, 125 Top Hats were built throughout the first half of 1995, and unlike the EMD counterpart, Norfolk Southern was the only user of this type. Both locomotive models were well used by Norfolk Southern, working on any train system wide, from the flatlands of the Midwest to the toughest grades down south. They were versatile locomotives in spite of their unconventional looks. I'm willing to bet that Norfolk Southern would have loved to get more standard cabs, but with FRA mandates becoming stricter, the railroad caved in and started getting the wide cab variants for their respective locomotive models, which became the case with new locomotives since then. But it does leave you wondering, which one of these was better? In spite of the matching horsepower and similar quantity, alongside being standard cabs, the reception amongst crews varied. The top hats were said to be good at low speed operations and were much quieter in the cab. The Spartans, though, were easier to get up to speed and had better durability between failures, but allegedly suffered from rough riding, slippery running, and also being rather loud in the cab. However, it was during the winters that the SD70's doors sealed better compared to the top hats, meaning that the Spartans were much more desirable in the winter seasons. But as for which one is better, I'm gonna be honest, both of them had their equal flaws, but it seemed like both of them worked fine enough out on the road and were equally satisfactory, at least in my opinion. But it's clear to see that they became outdated pretty quickly following the rise of wide cabs on the roster. And NS had two options: run them to the ground and dispose of them, or rebuild them. And I think you know where we're going with this. Starting in 2015, Norfolk Southern started to convert its top hats from 4,000 horsepower to 4,400 horsepower, classifying them as C40-9Ws, as Norfolk Southern was doing this conversion during their usual 184-day maintenance cycle. But that wasn't the only conversion taking place, as during the same time, top hats 8799 and 8879 were the first locomotives to be rebuilt under a new DC to AC program, now classified as AC44 C6Ms. They received new GE wide cabs akin to the GEVOs, locomotive speed limiters, cab signals, DPU systems, positive train control, and new AC traction motors, while still maintaining the original frame, prime mover, and long hood. This was a part of a deal between Norfolk Southern and General Electric to rebuild not only its top hats, but the entirety of their Dash 9 fleet in the AC-powered locomotives. All of the top hats were rebuilt in the C6Ms by the end of 2019, with the only exception being number 8798, which was scrapped following a head-on collision. The only remnant today of a top hat, though, is number 8808, with its cab being reused onto a battery switcher at General Electric's Erie plant. Another shameless plug. And then there's the SD70s, as they also went through a makeover in the form of the SD70 ACCs. Starting in 2018, NS began converting the Spartan cabs with a new EMD teardrop cab similar to the SD70 Aces, alongside new AC traction motors, Mitsubishi electronics, new alternators, AAR control stands, cab signals, dynamic brakes, positive train control, and locomotive speed limiter. In total, 52 units were rebuilt between 2018 and late 2019, being renumbered into the 1800 series. But, hold on. If 80 SD70s were rostered and 52 were rebuilt, then what happened to the other— Oh, I wouldn't have fucking guessed! God damn it. As we know, in 2019, Norfolk Southern's operations took a nosedive following the forceful push for precision scheduled railroading, which in turn brought a lot of cuts and purges, with plenty of DC-powered locomotives being thrown off the roster because of this. The 28 unrebuilt Spartan cabs, and even the wide cab SD70s, were retired and sold off the Progress Rail starting in the spring of 2020. And unfortunately, it seems like the unrebuilt Spartans haven't found new homes. Why NS didn't just keep rebuilding them is beyond me. Then again, I've heard conflicting sources stating that Progress Rail, the rebuild firm behind the ACCs, was asking for too much money for rebuilding them, to the ACCs being poor performers, allegedly. Then again, we can clearly see which rebuilds NS want to focus on instead. Although I have a gut feeling that it wouldn't just be the SD70s that would have gone rebuilt, but potentially the SD70Ms could have also gone the same treatment. I could be wrong though. Regardless, the remaining Spartan SD70s were thrown off the roster. What a waste of rebuild cores, honestly. So while these two locomotive models ended the chapter for standard cabs in America, they are still serving with Norfolk Southern, and by extension, Canadian National and that Peru company. While it sucks NS chose to ditch its unrebuilt Spartans and, well, the standard cabs are now gone, those remaining in service have been massively improved thanks to their conversion to AC traction, where they'll continue serving with the infamous railroad into the distant future, even through a cracked-ass monopoly excuse of a merger. Regardless, these two locomotive models helped put an end to a distinct cab design that defined the American diesel locomotive for many years.